for illumined life to be birthed into form. I am the truth. I am the light. Illumined, beloved, divine.
So hello there everyone, and welcome to this short video update and addition with me here today, which will also reference the previous video that I already made about taking into account our personality as well as our ascending soul and the spirit illumination that occurs as a physical merge of spirit and body. This is a journey that requires a total trust. It is a total blending into what we call first the soul personality, and then allowing the spirit to gradually start pouring through the impulses of the highly charged streaming energy that we often call the light body merge and light body integration, which is the path that I teach, as well as a part of the group called Aurea, who are masters of life force, and we sort of like do these experiments in our own physical embodiment. So as I go through this process, it can be very challenging, and I'm going to be challenged at specific points in terms of allowing more of this integration in, and from my own perspective, then I'll be able to see how things are progressing, where they're moving, what are some of the major issues, and then I'll be sharing about these issues. So if you're starting to argue with me in your mind, if some of the things don't resonate, please take into account that I teach physical ascension. I don't talk about the intermediate processes when the soul is, first starting the awakening in the human form, and the several processes that lead or might lead someone into different meditation practices or techniques or tools to be used. I won't talk about this. This is very sort of like beginner stage. I talk about these advanced levels of understanding that we are multidimensional beings, and therefore we require a very multifaceted approach to our whole being and how spirit is coming into matter. In the previous video, we've already talked about that we can neglect our personality, which is becoming more illumined, it's becoming more soul infused, and therefore we have to work our personality aspects. We have to work on the inner child. However, once certain trainings begin for different individuals, they may get very excited about specific practices like certain yoga or meditation practices. But the problem with this is that many times it becomes too vertical, because there might be what is called the attachment to this technique and this pathway alone, and yet it is only one piece of the whole picture. It is one of the components that on your journey you're receiving as an impulse from spirit that this is where you are, this is the work you're supposed to be doing. But many times people go to these retreats. I don't know them because obviously I don't go to these retreats, but many of them are designed in a way that they're very general teachings, taking into account or from very ancient traditions, and they're sort of like translated into our modern notions, and these retreats that teach people to meditate a certain way, to develop their practice a certain way, and they might be helpful to a certain point, but they can only get us so far, because in truth the illumined pathway, or the path of illumined union that I teach, is the full integration of our luminous light body and the physicality. It's not just spiritual ascension, it is the physical translation. It's how spirit begins to gradually merge with matter. And this is where most people don't understand why this is so important, and why this multi-spectrum awareness and approach to this integration work has to be received in that way, has to be developed in this way, because many times the practices will be too much focused on one thing and then singling out other aspects of life that we should also take into account and be guided into them in parallel. It is supposed to be a subsequent path, one thing leading to the other. You go to one meditation journey, you go one thing which will automatically trigger an impulse for something else, and it's sort of like spirit naturally guiding you through the progression in your physicality, while simultaneously you have to be aware that both masculine and feminine integration practices have to be embodied and received. So in this notion, that's why I really recommend, and I think everyone should really read this book if possible. It is beautiful, and it has so many superlative, supreme exercises. It's called, there's two books from Aurea. One is Pleiadian workbook. The other one is Pleiadian Tantric workbook, because they talk about the integration of Ka and Ba, so the components of our spirit and then our soul, so that we begin to practice the art of, you know, seeing the masculine, the electrical charge of nature, and then the soul, which is more magnetic recipient of life through us, and that merge becoming a divine, fully integrated divine child. Divine child is a merger of both, which means that if we are truly doing the merger of both, our inner child will sort of always feel satisfied. It will feel that it's aligned, that it's receiving its nourishment and support. If any of these yin and yang aspects will be negated and taken out into the picture, there will usually be sadness, a feeling of depression, because there's a component that we're not addressing. So in the Cosmic Christ Embodiment course that, you know, I'm sort of developing at this point, I will talk about the Divine Trinity of the three star practices that both need to kind of simultaneously at a higher level become aware to us, and then also used and utilized. You know, so in the Tantric workbook, the first book before the Tantric one, the Ka integration book, you have a description of the 13 phases that also correspond to the 13 numerical system from the ancient tradition as well as Mayan tradition, and how this light body integration goes in these sequences, right? And it's not like we shouldn't have this constant focus on achieving, and we shouldn't see that as an achievement and where we want to be. This has to happen organically, very naturally for us, which is very difficult for us to embrace in our modern society, where everything is becoming progress through perfection, right? This idealistic or, you know, perfectionist kind of idea that guides us into why we're even doing that. And we don't really stop and pause many times and say, am I doing my practice, or am I simply it's kind of like hoarding things. We can also energetically and informationally hoard things that are not having to do anything with where our process is at this point. So we're just overstimulating ourselves. We're energetically exhausting ourselves because we're being overwhelmed. And so to be really aligned with the balance of the unification of these practices that come to us naturally instead of forcefully, or sometimes someone might say, well, this meditation practice really worked for me, you know, maybe that will help you with these and these issues that you're having. First of all, issues, if anyone addresses them to us, you know, in truth, it can only be addressed from us to us. You know, people are mirrors. They can invite and trigger aspects of us, but it is us who get to decide, and it is our soul that will guide us. And through spirit, the spirit will simply have its own divine plan. And when we follow that, the right tools and techniques will always be presented. So they won't be so much dualistic and one-sided, but they're really going to come as an expression, a blossoming. You grow out of something, you move to the next stage. And a lot of times as humans, we're very fine and well-rooted with where we are. And we think this practice works for us, and it sort of gets a routine, it gets static. But let me tell you, the physical ascension journey is not static at all. When I started my galactic pulsar of light activation, I'm reaching the 70th day, something like that, I think, in terms of numerology. But it's sort of been a progression, and there's like, it comes in waves. And when you go through it, when you really monitor your own development, not through control but just observation, you will see, oh, these different stages and how spirit guided me through these tools that are self-developed. And sometimes an external thing comes and it triggers you in response to what you might need at this time, in this point in your life. It's very natural, and you will see the bigger picture unfolding. So especially if you will be very self-assessing in that way instead of self-controlling. So this light body merge can only happen through releasing complete control and trusting that each part is a segment, instead of seeing it as this is our practice and period. And we may get very rigid about it in our practices, which will still remain dualistic, because no practice covers the whole deal. You know, no one can tell, I teach the whole ascension and that's it, you know. The way I teach is through my own spiral as it unfolds. And that's it. That's about all that I can do. And you have to really assess where you are in the journey and getting what you need. That's most crucial. And what about, I want to address another issue. What about people who, let's say, they don't understand language? There's different languages, and most of these topics, how they were well written about, these great books exist in English. They're not translated into all languages. So you might say, well, what about the person who only speaks a language that, you know, like our own small country? No one speaks our language, right? We're a very small country. And you might say not a lot of these books are translated into our language, you know. There's a lot of these new agey books, but these very super rich content filled books are not always translated, and you might say, well, then that person will be deprived of that knowledge. Recently we had this discussion with my mother, who also doesn't speak the language and cannot read these books or get this material, and I sort of recommended to her that first she needs to start building her own plan with her own team, with the masters. But what came up for her as she did that first time was the kind of like a summation point of the beginning before the beginning. Although she's done a lot of work, they actually addressed the issue of, this is where ascension now begins. This is where the component of physical ascension begins. There was a lot of spiritual karmic release and preparation work, and a lot of people think that's ascension, and that's because they're awakening. It's more of the preparation work that will serve to get you to actually starting the light body merge, which goes in sequences and steps, and that's all perfect. And my last different amounts of time, there is no recipe for it. No one can tell you this is how it'll be. It's so mysterious and unpredictable. That's the beauty of it. But it is unified for you. It is a special divine plan that your soul has for you. That's why there's a beauty in it. So the masters have told my mother that she first needs to really have a desire. But I said to her, you know, first you need to feel you're worthy of it, because a lot of people still have that program, oh, that's not for me. It sounds very difficult and complicated. I'm not going to have that in this lifetime. Ooh, it's kind of far away from me. You know, it doesn't matter. What it matters is you take that first step, and that's feeling worthy. That's feeling, yes, it is for all. And it's up for me to really feel, you have to feel the desire, because otherwise always someone might push you towards that direction, and they might have a desire for you. Like sometimes we have a desire for our loved ones to shift, but we can't do the work for them, or we can't make them want things the way we want things, the way we're already naturally growing. Especially if you're a guide, you might have issues because you get this higher perspective, but you know that people have their own free will, and they have to learn to sovereignly use the mastery of their own design. So first knowing the worthiness, then deciding for it, then choosing it. Then third step is what the choice will bring for you. What kind of practices? What do you need in this moment? Because a lot of times a lot of mental pressure is there, and you might see where others are and you also want that, and there's a lot of copycatting, you know, like, oh, I want to be there, let me start doing that work. You know, a lot of the work I share on Patreon is not where most people are, but it kind of opens the space for them to see what's possible. And it's not necessarily where they are, but it's kind of like taking that initiative in desiring that more. Sometimes it's just about the desire coming, you know, and that blossoming. It's very important, you know, for us to understand that and to really allow ourselves to receive and then be the conscious creator, because there's two things actually. You know, one is learning about the artistry and mastery of the self, which you can address more through the eyes of the vertical, the masculine principle of life. And then there's the mastery of creation, which you can relate more to the feminine, the goddess principle of life, the life-giving, the upsurgence of divine creativity, life force, sacred dance, music, artistry, all of that, which is very much about moving energy. And first, we have to learn about the self. We have to get to the core of who we are, because that second step is then learning also how to work with energy, how to create energetically in an illumined way. So I have lots of courses to help you with that as well. You can always find that on my webpage, especially if you visit the Tantrika section, where a lot of these packages were designed. I'm now doing the Cosmic Christ Embodiment course, and we go deeper in this work on my Patreon page called Illumined Ascension. And in the previous video, I already shared with you I have some last remnants of the crystalline light pads, which you can now get at a half discount or discounted price. So check that out on my crystal shop. So I'll see you in the next one, guys. Have a beautiful time and enjoy. Love, wisdom, and power as always. Bye-bye.